If we were given the opportunity to rewrite history, right? Imagine you were given the opportunity to rewrite some of those stories about Jesus, and especially on a day like today, Resurrection Sunday. How would you have Jesus make his big resurrection reveal? How would you have him do that? This big resurrection reveal to his disciples. I don't know about you, but I'd want to go epic, right? Something the whole world can see, something the whole world is going to notice. I mean, this is your last chance to show the world, right? This is your chance. Show the world that you are right, that you are God. You've come back from the dead to prove it. So probably like that. I mean, shout out to AI. You can create anything nowadays. But I'd have him descend into the most crowded city on earth, and then you'd have everyone holding out their phones being broadcast all over the world for everyone to see, so that there's no mistaking that this is Jesus and that he's back. That's how I'd do it. But here's the thing. The way it actually played out was very different to how I would have imagined it. Because the way Jesus does end up one of his kind of big epic resurrection reveals, well, it's not epic at all. It's the opposite of epic. And it's the first point of our message this morning. It's this: Jesus actually might want to meet us just in the ordinary. Just in the ordinary stuff of life. Here's what I mean. Here's how Jesus, who's now been resurrected by this point, here's how he chooses to reveal himself to some of his disciples, right? I want to show you this story from Luke chapter 24. It goes like this. It says, that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. No major cities, no crowds, no live broadcasts, no heaven kind of being split open or anything like that. Just two disciples making their way from Jerusalem to Emmaus having a chat. And you know what? This actually makes sense. This actually makes sense because this is a theme that we see throughout Jesus in the Gospels, time and time again. When Jesus wants to meet someone, reveal himself to someone, you know how he often does it? Just in the ordinary stuff of life. Like, take Peter and Andrew, for example. They're at work one day. They're out working with their nets, fishing nets, earning a living when they get to meet Jesus. Take Peter's mother-in-law. She's sick in bed with a fever when she encounters Jesus. How about that well-known story of the Samaritan woman by the well? She's just out getting some water, something she did every single day, and that's where Jesus decides to meet her. See, here's the thing. Too often we think that Jesus can only be found, at religious places or through various rituals, or that we only get to see Jesus at work in spectacular or miraculous or supernatural ways. And mind you, let's be honest, churches do a great job at capitalizing on this idea, don't they? You need to come to our church if you're really going to meet Jesus. But here's the thing though. I reckon we're given all of these normal everyday encounters with people doing normal everyday things as a way of showing us that these are exactly the kinds of places where Jesus loves to meet us and where he might even decide to reveal himself to you. In a place where you might be least expecting it. Whether it's through the work you do, whether it's maybe even through an illness. Or even perhaps like the disciples in this story, whether it's out walking and having a chat with a friend. That's the first simple point from the story. That's the first takeaway. Jesus meets us in the ordinary. Here's the second one. Jesus also meets us, you know where? In our pain. In our pain, whether it's pain from some sadness we're experiencing or from being hurt by someone. Jesus loves to meet us in those places as well. Notice how the story continues, verse 15. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, what is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and rulers delivered him up, condemned to death, and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened." Just picture the scene. Jesus, who's still a stranger to them at this point, he sees them at a distance having a conversation. He kind of catches up to them. And then did you notice he kind of forces his way into their conversation? And he's like, "So what are you guys talking about?" But then did you notice that the question alone triggered something in them? And we're told that it kind of paralyzed them for a moment. And they stood still, looking sad. You see, before we accuse Jesus of, kind of rudely interrupting, their conversation and then on top of that, just killing the mood, we need to understand that what these disciples were feeling in that moment, that was actually the mood amongst all the people, all those disciples who had been following this supposed Messiah. This one they had hoped would deliver them from slavery and oppression from under the Romans. This Alexander the Great type figure they were hoping would lead them to freedom and establish their kingdom once again. This supposed king they were waiting so long for, well, just a few days ago, on Friday, they'd been at this guy's funeral. So think about it. As he's being buried, their hopes and dreams were being buried with him. And so now they're just trying to make sense of the whole thing. Like how could this Jesus have raised Lazarus from the dead and just 1 week later be killed himself? How could he stop the wind and the storms but not be able to stop the soldiers from killing him? How could he heal and save so many but not heal and save himself? How did it come to this? But more importantly, how could he have left us like this? See, if you've ever lost a loved one, if you've ever loved someone only to be being left deeply hurt by them, if you've ever believed in someone only to have been left greatly disappointed by them, if you've ever had, hopes and big dreams just come crashing down to nothing, if you know what that feels like, you know what it was like for those two disciples in that moment. I'm sure many of us have by now seen, so many of those Netflix documentaries that are popular right now about people getting scammed all over the place, people who lose everything, sometimes their entire life savings. Why? Because they trusted someone, they believed in someone, only to find out that they're a con man or a con woman or a fraud. Just imagine that was you. Just imagine that feeling of despair that must come over someone when you go to your bank account to realize it's been wiped clean, it's gone. Everything you've worked for your whole, gone. I reckon that's the kind of despair, the kind of pain that these two disciples must have been going through in that moment. Everything they've worked for, all those years invested into this one man, gone, wiped out. Now think about it. Again, if this were me writing this story, wouldn't this be the perfect place, the perfect time for Jesus to make his big reveal? I mean, they're sad, they're depressed, they're hopeless. And so I'm like, now Jesus, now's the time to show them who you are. Make all this sadness go away. However, he doesn't. He doesn't. And instead, Jesus kind of allows them more time to continue pouring out more of their sadness, to continue expressing more of their despair and their fears to him. And so it's interesting, isn't it, that he doesn't rush to remove the pain. Instead, he will continue to walk with them in the pain and through the pain. And I reckon he did that as a way of showing those disciples and showing us, whatever it is that you're going through, it's like he's telling us this morning, you know what? I see it. I care about it. I'm listening. You can tell me. You can talk to me. And even though you may not see the whole picture yet of what's going on and why, this journey we're on together, though, you and me, walking through it together, well, you know what? That's part of the journey towards resurrection. That's part of the journey towards restoration. There's hope and there's meaning to whatever you're going through right now. There is, I promise. But let's just walk a little further before I show you what that is. There may be a few more things that I want to teach you along the way. And that's how it is with these two disciples. He needed to teach them and show them a few more things first before he gives them his big reveal. And that leads us to the third point. Jesus meets us in the ordinary. He meets us in our pain, but also he meets us in the Word of God, in the Scriptures. We continue the story, verse 25. It says, he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And so beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. I don't know about you, but I find Jesus' reaction here very interesting, actually a little surprising. See, despite how sad and sensitive these disciples were in this moment, Jesus calls them foolish. But is he being rude? Is he being insensitive? I don't think so. It seems that he means foolish, not in the sense that you guys are so silly for being so depressed. No, I don't think it's that. Foolish in the sense that you missed something that was in front of you all along in the scriptures. And if you weren't so slow of heart to believe what was right there all along the scriptures, you'd understand the things happening around you right now. You see, as good Jews, they would have known the scriptures quite well. They would have known that the prophets spoke about the Messiah needing to suffer and die and be raised. It was all there in front of them in detail. And so if they knew all this, why were they so crushed when the Messiah was actually crucified? I think it's because of something that you and I can often relate to. I think that's what's going on. I think there is often a disconnect, isn't there? There's a disconnect between knowing the promises of God and actually believing the promises of God. In a sense, these disciples had failed to bring what they knew to be true up here in the mind and then applying it down here in the heart. In other words, to put it very simply, when things are going good, it's easy to believe the Bible. It's easy to have faith, trust God, to have peace and joy. But when things aren't going so good, that's when we really get to see what you're made of. That's when we get to see what you actually believe. But even then, here's where we get to see just how patient God is with each one of us. God is so patient with each one of us. The story of these two disciples should be an encouragement to each one of us who struggle with faith. An encouragement to all of us who are slow to believe at times. Because even though they should have gotten it the first time, they shouldn't have been so quick to despair and lose hope. Jesus doesn't give up on them. He doesn't leave them. Instead, he's so patient with them. He ends up spending the next few hours with them, walking them through the scriptures, showing them what they'd missed, showing them that the Christ was actually on every page of the Bible, every page from Genesis to Malachi. It all pointed to him. It says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures concerning himself. Can you picture the scene? I mean, we know they didn't have printed Bibles back then, okay? We know that. We know he didn't even need a hard copy of the Bible. He wrote the thing, and so I'm sure he had it all memorized anyway. But I like to imagine that Jesus he opens up the Bible. He opens up to the book of Genesis, and he's like, see there when it talks about the seed of the woman who crushed Satan? That's talking about me. And then he goes on to explain how. And then I imagine Jesus flipping over to the book of Exodus, and he's like, you know when Moses delivers his people out of slavery? And then after that, a lamb is sacrificed, and every house that is covered by the blood of the lamb, that house will be saved. Well, that's talking about me too. And then he goes on to explain how. And then I imagine him like book after book, going book after book through all the scriptures, showing them that he is on every page. And we can just imagine how their minds, imagine you've got Jesus as your teacher. Their minds are being blown right now. How did we never see it like this? And as their Christ starts to come alive on every page, well, their Christ also starts to come alive in their hearts as well. Because we're told further down in the story that something gets ignited in that moment, deep within their hearts. Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened up the scriptures to us? They're still not there yet. Jesus hasn't made his big reveal yet, but it's just a matter of time. Because once Jesus ignites that fire of curiosity within someone, well, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before their eyes are opened to see Jesus for who he truly is. And that leads us to the last point. Jesus meets us in the ordinary. He meets us in our pain. He meets us in the scriptures. And then lastly, Jesus meets us in the invitation. The invitation. In other words, he finally reveals himself when we invite him in. He wanted to show these disciples and to show us the resurrection, it's not just some historical event for us to believe in. No. The resurrection story is ultimately about a personal invitation. It's an invitation to meet with and dine with and fellowship with the risen Christ. Look at verse 28. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened in that moment and they recognized him. They'd been walking for a few hours now, listening to Jesus teach, and it seems that it's like a bond had started to form between them. They were slowly becoming friends. It's like Jesus was slowly growing on them, and now they're ready to take that friendship to the next level. They're ready to invite him in, still without fully realizing who he is, though. And that's kind of how I've heard people describe how they came to faith, how they came to Christ. A slow process. It's like Jesus was growing on me. I wanted to find out more until I realized that I was ready to take the next step. I remember reading a biography a few years ago about a writer in Hollywood. It's a story of this guy, a Jewish guy who converts to Christianity. In his biography, this is how he describes his conversion. He says, "There had been no flash of light on the road to Damascus. Jesus had not appeared to me as I lay drunk in the gutter. There had only been a slow dawning of awareness that had solidified into the certainty that I was a Christian." I've heard many people say it like that. I can't pinpoint a day or a time. I just knew that I believed in him and that I wanted to follow him. And so it's this same kind of slow dawning of awareness that these disciples seem to be going through as well. And so with that fire of curiosity now ignited, they realize that they're not done with him. They need to find out more. And so they invite him into their home and now into their lives. And with that invitation, the risen Jesus is about to reveal himself. Why? because they were willing to keep exploring. But now notice something really interesting that happens next. I'm not sure if you picked up on this. Something very unconventional happens during that invitation. You see, for these disciples and for the culture of that time, it would have been very unconventional for the guest to be the one to break bread and give thanks and to do the honors at a meal like that. But by now, they at least knew that this man was no ordinary guest. They've spent hours listening to him teach. And so I imagine now that they're wondering, I wonder how he prays. I wonder how he prays. And so they break with the norm and they ask this guest to do the honors. And so Jesus breaks bread and says a prayer of blessing. And we're told that it's in that moment their eyes were opened and they recognized him. I've loved reading up on all the speculation as to why people think that it was in that moment that the disciples finally recognized that this must be the risen Jesus. Like, for example, here's one. It was because, they were so close to him at the dinner table that when he lifted his hands to break bread, it's like they could see the scars on his hands from where the nails were on the cross. Another one is that people think that it was the prayer itself. Perhaps these two disciples were there when Jesus gave thanks at the feeding of the 5,000. And so as he prayed right next to them, all these memories just come flooding back for them. It all sounded so familiar. And so they're like, it's him, it's him. But whether it was the scars or whether it was the prayers, we just don't know. But here's what we do know. It was all leading to this moment. Their journey with Jesus through the pain, it was all leading to this moment. The time they had spent hearing from the Word of God in the Scriptures, it was all leading to this moment. Their willingness to take the next step and actually invite Jesus in, it was all leading to this moment where their eyes are open and they recognize that it's him. And I love that Jesus' big resurrection reveal happens like this. There's no earthquake shattering moment. There's no fire falling from the sky kind of, no voice from heaven kind of moment. There's none of that. There was just an invitation for Jesus to come into their lives. Just a simple, slow dawning of awareness that had solidified into the certainty that I am now a Christian. I am now a believer. And so just to end, let me ask you one last question. Where are you on that journey with Jesus? Where do you find yourself this morning on that journey with you? And let me be clear. Let me be very clear. The fact that you're even here at church on Easter Sunday, well, surely that places you somewhere along that journey with Jesus. And maybe you're still at the ordinary stage. You're getting acquainted with Jesus. Maybe you've got friends inviting you to church. Maybe you've got family dragging you to church. You're still not fully convinced that the resurrection actually happened or why it even matters. And if that's you, well, we're just glad that you're even here. And we hope that you would continue exploring Jesus here with us here at Aloha. We won't push you or rush you, because ultimately we know it's going to be up to Jesus to show you how and when he opens your eyes so that you recognize him. Maybe for others here this morning, there's still some pain or some hurt that's slowing you down on that journey. And if that's you this morning, well, I hope you've heard Jesus' message for you today. That whatever you're going through, he sees it and he cares about it. And he's waiting for you to simply just continue pouring out your sadness, despair, and fears to him. Even though you can't see the whole picture yet of what's going on and why, this journey that you've begun with him, he promises you today it's leading somewhere. There's hope, there's meaning, there's restoration to what you're going through right now, but perhaps he wants you to keep trusting him. Keep walking with him a little further, just a little further, before he shows you what that meaning and that purpose is. Maybe for others this morning, maybe you're at a stage where you're, like maybe this is you, like your heart does get kindled, a fire gets ignited when you do read from the Bible and you do open the scriptures, and whenever you learn something new about Jesus, something you'd never seen before, and you know that you're slowly starting to believe it, but perhaps you don't know what to do with that. Perhaps you don't know what the next step is. Well, maybe this morning the next step is, like with those disciples, maybe the next step is to finally just invite him in. Invite him in. But if you do, be warned. If you do, be warned, because when you do, your life will never be the same again. Just think about what a day it must have been for these disciples. What an emotional roller coaster kind of a day. In just a matter of hours, they go from having their hopes and dreams utterly crushed to then in an instant having their course of their lives changed forever. Did you notice the very first thing they do once their eyes have been opened? Notice verse 33. And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered, and they said, "The Lord is risen indeed." The Lord is risen indeed. And what made the difference? What made the difference? What can turn a heart full of sadness into a heart full of joy? What can turn a heart full of despair into a heart full of hope? You know what? What can turn a group of men fearing for their lives into the most courageous kind of men that the world has ever seen? Because do you remember those disciples who were closest to Jesus? On Friday, none were willing to stand by this man. But after Sunday, they would all end up dying for this man. What made the difference? What made the difference? The resurrection. When your eyes are finally open to see Jesus for who he truly is, the risen Lord, well, that changes everything. So let me ask you again, are you ready to finally take that next step and invite him in? If that's you this morning, let me leave you with some words of Jesus. Let me leave you with this promise that Jesus makes to anyone who is ready to invite him into their lives. He says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door," simply just open up that door. He promises to come in, to eat with him, and hear with me. The risen Jesus is alive. And today he's standing at the door of your life, waiting patiently for you to invite him in. Perhaps he's been waiting patiently for a while now, waiting to make his big resurrection reveal to you. And maybe like with those disciples, it's all been leading to this moment today. I mean, every day of the year would be a good day to finally invite him in, but why not take that step today? Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. If you're ready to take that step and to invite him into your life, I'd love to pray with you after the service.